We'll see their quality. So what's today? The 29th of July. I don't even know which skit meeting this is. It's like either of recent memory, the 4th or the 6th, depending on whether we count the last one, where Neil and I just talked.
It's the 29th July edition.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yes.
2024. So.
One of the hobby projects of this community really should be finding a way of translating a skit transparency service into an RSS feed, so we could like really dog food the things we do. Maybe that's an AJ hobby project. See, most people would not find that exciting and be like, why would I need that? So.
Well, I mean, if you wanted to find something, it might be the discovery APIs that we've been starting to discuss.
Oh, so much fun. So much fun.
Well, it's just, you know, I don't know if Ollie's gotten it back again, but it's just an interesting topic. So anyway, I'm already being distracted trying to keep up with it. So we can talk about, you know, the IETF meeting was last week. So we can do a recap of that. Although I believe the videos will get posted if they're not already posted soon. So out of the way, we can do the TLDR version. I can share the deck and we can go through that. That pretty much summarized a large majority of what SCITT related efforts were there. The only other one that was interesting is the DM project for digital emblems. So that's another project that came from IETF. So, they got posted. Great. So maybe that is a good tangent to go on, because you can watch the video. But like I said, I'm happy to just breeze through the slides if there's any questions. But the DM project was interesting. Effectively, it's mostly sponsored by the Red Cross. There were some other entities there as well, and they're trying to figure out how to do digital emblems, which the concept of emblems are the things that go on various buildings, trucks, packages that state these are things that I'm trying to be more generic, but basically the Red Cross symbol as an example, or where this package was authorized from, not so much authorized from the broader sense we say, but is there nuclear chemicals or something in the package, and some of those things that goes across borders, and they can look at the side of a box and so forth. But mostly they're trying to figure out how do they communicate in the digital world where you're not physically looking. Even when you are physically looking, you can't always see through fog and rain and trees, where something that should be avoided even in a combat zone. So trying to figure out how to put codes around that.
What's the name of the project again?
It's the acronym is DIEM, DIEM. And it stands for Digital Emblems. And
I put the data tracker link. It's like a working group before a working group for you and people watching. A BOF, or a birds of a feather, is basically people considering future work and being told whether the IETF can scope it as unique work, and we'll have a charter. So SCITT is definitely far after that. It's a working group. A BOF is like, let's have a plan to consider a plan to ratify a plan.
And SCITT went through that BOF phase. That's how we get there. Part of it is a routing to decide, does this already exist in many elements of what's in IETF? How does it relate to other standards bodies? Are there existing standards to be used? Is there something unique? So all of those conversations were happening there. But part of it related to just tying into SCITT, because the DM stuff itself was independently interesting all by itself. Of course, it's fraught with, it becomes a target for people who want to take social stances on things, which is fair, but at the same token, there's lots of different debates on that. I don't think we should not have TCP/IP or HTTP, because those are also used for people to do bad things. Like, we need standards for good people to do good things and whatever. So,
not to make this overly political and too ironic, are you basically reframing packets don't kill people, network operators kill people? Is that where you're going?
That's one way to say it.
I'm sure there's one company in the last few weeks that's really felt the heat on that one, and I don't think they can blame only their software. So,
which?
Not network operators per se, but if you were to talk about the hackathon, one person did a demonstration around someone I won't name, a group of people that have captivated the world with a software deployment error that basically crippled everything.
Yes.
Happens all the time. I have no idea what you're talking about.
I mean, honestly, that's why when people talk about it, I'm kind of amused. I'm like, this isn't even the first one in 2 years. This is like the third massive one. Like, what are you all on about? Nothing's changed since the previous one. So how serious is it that you still haven't changed your behavior? Like, does the whole internet have to shut down for a week? Is that when people will go, oh, this is a problem?
Back to digital emblems. So, you know, if I guess I could imagine the Red Cross saying, gosh, we need to label our trucks so that people don't bomb us, for example. But what sort of thing would be labeled with a digital emblem, and who would pay attention to it differently or whatever? That's
a good question. From my perspective, there are two different things. So like, this is like the SCITT community musing on how IETF works. And this is not a formal IETF meeting, right? When people talked about the things they could do, there was an ambiguity, and I was following the mailing list before. Now, the obvious one is the one you talked about. How can you encode and put an emblem that has some kind of digital information on a physical object? And then the other one, which I think actually was in scope, but the conversation where I was confusing, is not putting digital emblems on physical infrastructure. They said putting it on cyber or digital infrastructure. And I asked repeatedly, what does that mean? Is a camera cyber, physical, or digital infrastructure? Or do we mean a network service? And like, as you look at it and you scan the internet. So there's been varying communication amongst everyone who's involved before the meeting itself and during the meeting itself. And they waxed on that. And most people focused on the physical and its relationship to actually shipping things physically that basically are in boxes and saying there are computers in this box. But I'm pretty sure that also was not in the scope that was discussed by a key stakeholder who believes that they're going to control it. I don't know if IETF works that way, but that's okay. And this ambiguity, I don't think was hammered out in the BOF, and it was what's called the non-worker forming BOF. So no one was resolving to make a scope for a charter. That wasn't planned. So physical or digital. But no one described those terms very accurately, and most of the debate was around that. I don't know if Steve.
In the internet area?
There was a couple. So there was a couple of use cases and a couple of the groups that were clubbed together inside the meeting. So there was a couple of scenarios from the digital emblems on top of trucks and buildings and hospitals and things of that nature, so that they can be broadcast and discovered digitally. There's the physical goods that are transporting across borders, that including camera crews going to hostile locations. How can they represent themselves so they can bring pallets of equipment into the zone and then make it through quickly? And then there's another interesting one. Well, there's two others. One was network devices that should not be hacked because they're there to support, humanitarian kind of situations. So how can you identify routers and switches and MRI machines as being there for good and should be avoided? There's a lot of interesting questions around that, and this is where it does get more complicated. Does the factions that are following the UN kind of rules, would they actually go to discover and say, oh, I see, I'm going to leave that alone, as opposed to, oh, I'm going to use that to hide behind? So that's where there was another one that actually was really interesting, is they wanted to be able to put, well, let me come back. If you're trying to probe for what events are or what hardware or infrastructure is out there, somebody can detect that you're asking, is this a bombing target site? So they wanted to make sure that they can express information without somebody querying and being discovered who's querying.
Yeah, they want covert disclosure or discrete disclosure.
Yeah, so they wanted a way to basically put on certain endpoints packets that when you're just doing normal HTTP requests or other network requests, that in the response payload, an embedded digital identity can, digital emblem, as they put it, could be put.
Okay, so that's helpful. And back in the SCITT context,
A database, a verifiable database for those things, if people want it. They're very adjacent with like a very skinny overlap.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah. Steve, if you're listening and you're still connected, you've completely cut out and we can't really hear you. I'll message to that effect. At least he'll have a very cool profile picture in the video. Oh no, he's coming back.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, sorry, Mark is network connectivity, fun stuff, because I don't have digital identities on them. So from a SCITT perspective, the thing that I thought was interesting for us is that we basically provide identity context to things. Right, that's effectively what SCITT is basically associating who said what about something. So if that's what that's how you're associating an identity with a statement about an artifact.
We have specifications for digitally signing things for an issuer, but like who the issuer is to human beings is not something that's clearly defined within the SCITT architecture. That's something you could build applications on top of SCITT, but I would argue that's not core to SCITT at all. That's like a application level business use case for SCITT instances, right? I just see there's a little nuance there. I don't disagree with what you're saying, but like if someone digitally signs something, the architecture doesn't make it clear what corporate or human entity is associated with that unless you actually want to read one of 3 or 4 vaguely suggested non-binding signing architecture implementations. One of them is X509. Like you put whatever in an X509.
Or Neil or all of us are dropping.
Neil, can you hear me?
I hear you fine. I've heard you fine the whole time. Okay. So I think Steve is having some network issues. And I agree with everything you just said about, like SCITT. I mean, not that I'm even up to date on SCITT, but it leverages other things which I've always struggled with. What is, who would believe a claim that this digital entity, which SCITT pins down very carefully, is associated with some real world entity?
Yeah. I'm not saying what Steve is saying is very possible as an application layered on top, but this is why.
Well, all he said is who said what about something. Now, who, if you interpret it as a digital entity, that's good.
I think he said give identity to things. I'm just like, identity is a word I get worried about because in the standard space, that's like the most crowded space, and people, there's actually like, we don't actually have a lot of specification around that in SCITT. Now there are IETF groups and many other non-IETF work groups working on this concept. And I thought that's probably, without being said verbatim in SCITT drafts, is the reason it's pluggable. That's why we're not even specific about that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I didn't hear him say that. I said provide identity context. He might have said it.
Oh, well, actually, the context word is important. In that case, you win. You're right. I need computers to remember things because we can tell that I'm very selective and subjective with my hearing. This is why I can't be a digital or a kinetic emblem. So is it cybernetic emblem? Imagine what that would be like. But it's very interesting. He'll come back.
After the meeting, maybe he's coming back in.
I suspected that something was going on because I thought at one point only I couldn't hear him. But yeah, it's very interesting. Like you could see a use case that's binding it from the beauty of IETF, the reason I like it that much is like everything is public. You can go to the mailing list and see, you probably are familiar with Ori. He's a frequent contributor, right, to SCITT. He already has a proof of concept, but as far as persistent data goes, no one's even talking about that now. He actually built a prototype like over the weekend, or if you ever watch this, your productivity makes me very frustrated as a human being. That's basically binding a QR code. That's a streaming QR code. It actually is like it actually is changing. It's like how you can make a video out of layering pictures, and it's binding to certain kinds of DNS records. But notice that doesn't have persistence, and a lot of the security guarantees that you would get out of persisting data with identity context, to properly quote Steve, and other metadata. So like that other infrastructure is out of scope of DM, but like gives interesting value. Also, like one of the things I don't really understand is that technically, and I pointed this out in the buff, if we're talking about SCITT, the work group, that kind of stuff, physical supply chain security, is kind of out of scope. So I'm not really sure what that would mean for us as a group to reconsider, but that also came up. If we got back to the SCITT working group, that was something I had asked. Welcome back, Steve.
Steve, can you hear us say things?
Whether you like it or not. He's thinking about it.
Yeah, still connecting. I've been there too.
Yes.
Well, while he's doing that, can you sketch this dynamic QR code to DNS record without persistence one more time? Like what's a use case for it?
So let's say you need a digital emblem. Steve, now that I can't tell if you can hear, but your video's back. I'm talking about yet another Ori creation in 2 days. So what happens is that I can post after I stop talking or as I'm talking the link to the mail, which actually links to the GitHub, but he summarizes it much better than I. But the notion is that if you have a camera that supports it in a mobile device or something, that there is enough support. It's just very slow. It will basically stack the data and then resolve that there is a DNS record or a URL that's there, and that you could basically digitally bind an emblem to some data that's cryptographically signed on a special kind of record, DNS record that I think is not a standard yet. It's also something, or at least his application of it, which is a TLS-A record, which is from an adjacent not SCITT or DM working group draft that he had pitched before. I'm not really doing a great justice. So in the interim, if you go to that DM page and you look at the about, there's a mailing list, and then you can see the mail archive. And I'll stop talking in a sec when I get you the link to the specific message in the GitHub repo. But that's like the worst long-winded description of it. I actually wanted to have him play with it, but like I didn't quite understand why he said it's slow. He summarizes.
Great.
So just because I got dropped out, I guess maybe we're talking about digital security, the network attacks. So I got attacked, but so who knows? I just had to reboot my router. I mean, at the core, you were talking about whether it's corporate or individual other identities. I think it's the same concept of what we said related to the types of artifacts, right? SCITT is content agnostic. And we've also moved away from DID-Web being the primary identity type to saying it supports any identity type. So it doesn't matter whether it's enterprise or personal or full or others. It's you decide what the identity, it fits into the issuer, and that's all we.
Yeah, I think the nuance that we were talking about, you said like identity context, and that makes perfect sense to me. Did you just freeze again? Are you still there, Steve?
He's having one of those days.
Yeah, been there, done that.
And apparently I'm not done being attacked.
I see. Anyway,
I should tell my colleagues every time that I'm having a network problem, it's like I'm getting attacked and that I can't do my job. I should really think about that. If my boss from work sees this, that was a joke. I'm not actually going to do that.
The only nuance that we're discussing is whether a physical object, an actual human, an actual registered company with whatever can be, whether SCITT explains how to do that. There's a lot of other work that tries to do that. It's a hard problem.
Yes.
But SCITT, yes, very flexible, all kinds of ID schemes, all kinds of options. Anyway.
There's a lot of relevant stuff if you've heard of SPICE, which is the other IETF group, which is about all kinds of internet credentials. So identity is theoretically part of that. There's also the whimsy one, which is like, let's give machines and non-human things identifiers. That's actually a lot of their scope more so than SCITT, right? Like we would plug into some of those things. So it was very interesting. I thought that work is very exciting. I don't know if I'm one to speak to it. The scope and who would use it is also kind of unclear. There's a lot of focus on customs and things. Steve and I have a different recollection, but some people were like, we understand what international organizations do. It's not clear how the overlap of the 3 examples described are immediately relevant to each other, and if there's a superset of them or they're actually completely distinct problems. That kind of conversation is pretty frequent in ITF when things are starting up. So the app is fun. I haven't actually really evaluated it very heavily. I just infuriated by how he does such nice things so quickly.
While we're waiting to see if Steve comes back, why don't you tell me something about the IETF meeting? Because I actually...
That's a good point. Okay, so full disclosure, you would think I would remember it better. I was the note taker at one point. People discussed the hackathon. I can drop the notes in the chat. But before notes are officially published, someone takes them on like a giant Hedgepad, Etherpad instance. So that's there. So I'll read my recollection of some of them. There was an overview of SCITT for people who didn't understand it. There was most of the conversation was summarizing a significant amount of small or medium-sized incremental changes to the architecture draft and what to do with the use cases document, which is kind of perpetually being used and not published, because publishing it kind of solidifies it and locks it in, and then there's a lot of work to redo that. That gets rediscussed very often at the meetings for people's awareness. There was a lot of talk about Scrappy and how that was tested through the hackathon. Steve actually did a good portion of this work in conjunction with not just someone from his company, but from DigiCert, and they both made 2 somewhat equivalent implementations. So Steve and others have Python-based things that are either from this community or actually extended out from their own example. That's a GitHub action, so it's reusable, not as a complete web service, but in continuous integration and continuous deployment if you can like stage artifacts in a GitHub repo. Interestingly, people from DigiCert who have been more and more active in SCITT have an equivalent system that they might have built with, I'm pretty sure, independent code that's actually a Golang implementation they have for the different building blocks of SCITT. John Geeter works with Steve Lasker in their employer data trails, and apparently they cross-tested the interoperability of the inputs and outputs of these 2 systems, and we're using that to drive forward some improvements to not just the architecture, but really a lot of specific improvements to the reference API document, the Scrappy document, and that were based in a lot of things working, but some things that were suboptimal or need to be tweaked. I asked a lot of questions about scope. Yeah, I actually missed the hackathon. Someone thanked me for being. I was not there. Sorry,
is John with DigiCert?
John Geeter and Steve Lasker worked for a company called Data Trails. The person from DigiCert, I think, I don't know if they were at the meeting, but they definitely were at the hackathon. I think is Corey Bonal. Corey, if you ever watch this and I butcher your name, I've only seen you once in a meeting, and I've only seen your name written, and I'm really sorry. I can find the notes from the hackathon. If you go to the slides, I can actually put a link in there, and you can see the PDFs, and they reference a lot of these things. I'm just multitasking while I talk to you.
No, but this is kind of an index to the slides that might be useful.
I don't know if there's a URL in there. There isn't. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
So are you saying that the interop was between this Python implementation and the DigiCert Golang implementation, or between 2 others? Okay.
From what I understood, someone had hinted I was there, but I actually was not. So I was actually at a personal function the whole weekend. But from what I recall from the slides, I will find a link, because if you go to an IETF agenda, you can kind of find these things. It's loading, not as during IETF, it's like the most visited page, so it's not nearly as slow as it was the day before. Let's see, I can give you a link that lists like all the slides for any session. So this is the SCITT session, and I guess if you want, I could share screen for other people to figure it out. Let's see, which one are we talking about here? Or are they all condensed in one? Makes it easy. Sorry, 1 second. I have to find the PDF. I'm not loading a PowerPoint on my computer. Now you know all my personal views on different data formats, right? Because that's why you come to this meeting. Move tab to end, and then move that tab to the front. Okay, now we're making progress, maybe. I need to share a screen. Can you see a PDF with an IETF logo at the bottom. I don't know if you can see this, but it says I'm sharing a screen. We go somewhere down here in the link I said. I guess I could put it in the show notes or the notes for this session. This is some of the slides, but if we get far enough in, I search for the word hackathon, it was put somewhere else. There was a lot of changes from basically one very what's the word, prolific IETF standards contributor, not just in SCITT but everywhere. There was discussion of that, but like a lot of those things are nitpicky and hard to describe. Here's the end-to-end code thing. I thought they talked about Go Cozy, Pi Cozy. I don't know if they have links to the specific implementations. I just happen to be subscribed to them, and so maybe I can put an email summarizing what you rightfully should ask, which is where is all that stuff coming from? It seems it was just summarized, but they tried 2 different library implementations under the hood with 2 separate GitHub actions.
Cool.
So yeah, I'm still sharing the PDF, right? It's not like the infinite mirror of screen share. Okay.
End-to-end code validation of issuer role workflow.
Yes. So if I were to guess, I'm subscribed to enough of these things, I should be able to find it. DigiCert. So there's something called SCITT action from DigiCert, but I think there's one that's identically named but different software from someone else. Is it also Data Trails? And theirs is SCITT action? I could be wrong here. I'm kind of riffing from memory. Or it's the one that we maintain in the SCITT community, but I didn't know I was... Okay, yes, it is. It is on Data Trails. It is not a community project. So despite them being named the same, they're different. So yeah.
Great.
Stop sharing that. My computer's upset with all the resources I'm using.
Yeah, my fan is going to. It's annoying.
Yeah. But that's it. I actually, because we had a conversation on the mailing list, I didn't actually prepare the GitHub attestation thing. And then there was a chance based on an IETF mailing list that we would have a guest speaker who wanted to talk about a different implementation entirely and approach to making a standardized or community adopted REST API for bill of materials discovery, but they haven't shown yet. So maybe that's a next week thing. I don't know if there's anything you want to talk about. I thought this meeting would go very differently, so I didn't prepare last night.
Nothing else offhand that I was ready to jump into or ask about.
No, cool. Nor I really. I had other things to do. I go to IETF basically the whole week, and usually I do go to the hackathon, not just this time. So I'm kind of catching up after a week of doing things, but not that are not IETF things. I have to do the not IETF things now that I put off for weeks. So
yeah, I'm looking. I'm trying to prepare for a trip and expecting that when I come back, and it's always daunting. The world keeps doing stuff. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah. Well, I guess we could end early. I was actually more excited to talk to Steve about some material things that relate to our community resources on the website, because he said he would, on the mailing list, he mentioned specifically you want to talk about that. So maybe I'll just follow up on list. Yeah. Because it seems like a video call right now is not happening.
Yeah, exactly. That's fine.
If that's it, I guess we can wrap up early. All right.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Enjoy catching up.
I mean, I guess enjoy is a verb. I'll enjoy doing the work I should always be doing. Yes.
You'll appreciate having done some of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, now everything's in the same time zone, so it's a little bit more constructive. I have to kind of spread my time during, because Vancouver, I forget, is Pacific time, not even Central time. So it kind of moves my whole evening into work mode. So anyway, not your problem. Let's stop recording, and I will end this. It was a pleasure to see you, and hopefully other people enjoy.
Always. Take care.
Thank you.